Hey guys, how you doing? This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review. Welcome back to the channel. And I initially didn't think I was going to make this video or have this conversation with you guys. Obviously, talking about Metroid after E3, now that it has finally wrapped up yesterday. And given the fact that, of course, we didn't see or hear from Metroid at all, despite a lot of reasons that a lot of us maybe expected to see or hear from Metroid. And the disappointment we all feel is obviously pretty severe. But I still wanted to discuss this because honestly, I haven't been able to get it out of my brain. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that following the Nintendo Direct, after we didn't see Metroid or the Metroid Prime trilogy, I posted a screenshot of myself starting a brand new game of the original Metroid Prime, my favorite game ever made. And it was just something that I did kind of to be symbolic for myself, you know? I discussed going into E3 how we've been waiting for the Metroid Prime trilogy to show up for so long, and there was so many things telling us that it's going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch sometime soon. My own personal beliefs, plenty of behind-the-scenes info, plenty of public info that industry insiders have shared as well. And when it didn't show up, it hurt. Like, it was really devastating, you know? And as I discussed before the show, I was prepared to kind of remove the game from my radar if we don't actually see it show up at E3, because I can't continue to be invested in this idea and continue to wait and hope and wonder after almost a year of pretty substantial reports and discussions and rumors about it happening. It's like, if this continues to not happen, at some point, I need to stop expecting it, and I need to almost stop wanting it. And so that's why this whole situation coming off of E3 is weird, and I feel like I've made the right decision to not be entirely focused on the Prime trilogy, but it is a hard thing to do. And so, anyway, despite all of that stuff, the actual purpose of this video and conversation I wanted to have with you guys today is more just about what does Metroid do now? What is going to be next for the series? What should we expect coming off of E3 where there was no sign of Metroid? Not the Prime trilogy, not a remake of a classic game, not a brand new 2D game like a lot of us maybe thought might happen, myself included. I was kind of hoping for some kind of cool surprise. What happens now? You know, I mean, what is it that Nintendo might really be doing with the franchise as a whole behind the scenes, where we know that they're working on Metroid Prime 4, and 6 months ago they had to restart development on that game, so we know that that one is really, really far off, but you'd have to think that they want to do something to keep the series and the franchise alive, something to keep public interest invested in the idea of Metroid, of Samus, of all of these different things. And, I've got a lot of ideas. I think a lot of us have a lot of theories over what they could do, and I thought it would be fun to talk about. The first thing I want to do is actually focus this back onto the Metroid Prime trilogy, even though I spent the first couple of minutes sort of talking about it here. To kind of further explain my whole thinking here with, removing the game from my radar, deciding to just restart my Wii copy of the Prime trilogy and just kind of focus that way. It really comes down to, like I said, protecting my emotions, you know? If for any of us who still want to believe every other day we're going to wake up to this news about the Metroid Prime trilogy, that becomes more and more dangerous the longer we go without it happening. And so I realized going into E3 after so long of all these rumors, I was like, you know what? If we don't see it at E3, and it's okay that we didn't see it at E3, by the way, guys. The fact that Metroid didn't show up isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. Like, I'm not crying about it. You saw my reviews and my recaps of Nintendo's E3 Direct. You saw maybe my live stream, my live replay reaction that I posted. I did not walk away from that thing disappointed at all, even though there was no Metroid. Like, that's totally okay. But, thinking, hey, we might not see this at E3, and at that point, I need to just remove it from my radar. I can't be focused and invested in seeing this thing come anymore. But I acknowledge that, man, Nintendo might just be doing some crazy stuff and wanting to keep it in their back pocket for a very, very long time. And so, yeah, it might still show up in the future. Plenty of people have discussed with me since their E3 Direct that they probably just want to wait and release the Prime trilogy in some remastered form closer to the release of Prime 4. And if I'm being honest with you guys, that does make sense. It's not a crazy theory. Really, it's not. I think that there even could be some truth to that. And that obviously, maybe they had it ready to go this year because the initial plan was to release Metroid Prime 4 this year. But then, of course, the whole thing got restarted. So they've now moved the Prime Trilogy re-release back by quite a bit. And, even if that turns out to be true, which may or may not be true, I just don't even know what to think about it anymore. But even if that turns out to be true, I mean, you guys have heard my theory. I think we're going to see Metroid Prime 4 release in 2022. That's 3 years from now. I think that game is so far off that means probably the Prime Trilogy is really far off. Maybe that game's not coming out till late 2021 or maybe early 2022, something like that. And, I also theorize that Prime 4 is probably going to be launching the next Nintendo hardware, their next-gen machine to succeed the Switch. And so that, again, further changes what they might want to do with the Prime Trilogy. If that's the truth, if Prime 4 is coming out around the time of their next machine, does that mean that they want the Prime Trilogy to be also on that same machine? Because imagine if, March 2022, they released the Prime Trilogy remaster on the Nintendo Switch, but then by the end of the year in November, maybe they release the successor machine and Metroid Prime 4 at the same time. And sure, there might be a cross-gen Switch release for Prime 4, but wouldn't Nintendo prefer that Prime Trilogy to just be on that new hardware, the same next-gen hardware, along with that next-gen launch version of Prime 4? And so, I'm thinking so far in the future, it's probably kind of dangerous to do so, but I just get these thoughts in my mind, and so it's hard for me to really anticipate the Prime Trilogy ever, if not maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. So then we start looking at other Metroid projects and things that I was talking about just weeks ago. Do they release Samus Returns as a remake or a port, I should say, from the 3DS to the Nintendo Switch? Maybe that's something that shows up in a Nintendo Direct later this year. I actually feel like a Nintendo Direct later this year might be a time where if Nintendo is planning a different Metroid game in surprise, that's where we might see it before the end of 2019. So hey, that could be some great news. We can cross our fingers for that. But yeah, does a Samus Returns port make sense? I actually tend to think so, and at first, after Samus Returns came out, I didn't really necessarily believe in that or think that it was a good idea. But now that it's been coming up on 2 years since that game released, it's like, you know what? If they gave that game an HD polish and they released it on the Switch for like, $40 maybe, I think it could be huge, and it would also get more gamers to play that game. I think it would get more hands on it, more eyes on it, even though I think it sold like a little bit over 1 million copies on the 3DS. It still deserved to sell a lot more than that, and it is a phenomenal game, a great 2D side-scrolling game that basically was a brand new game compared to the original release of Metroid 2. So bringing that to the Switch makes sense for a lot of reasons, and I just cannot fathom how popular that game would be. I think it could sell more than 2 million copies on the Switch, maybe even more. And if they even added new content to it, then it would probably sell even better. I've also often talked about different Metroid collections. Nintendo has released collections of like Mario games and Zelda games and stuff in the past. There's a current trend right now with, other companies releasing collections like Secret of Mana or the Contra collection, Castlevania collection, stuff like that. What if Nintendo decided one day to do a Metroid collection? I don't think it's a crazy idea, where they include, Metroids 1, 2, Super Metroid, Fusion, maybe even Zero Mission, just like all these 2D games. Heck, maybe they do something and include Samus Returns in that, for the Nintendo Switch. I think that's not an insane idea, right? I think that maybe we would see Nintendo do something like that. And so, whereas maybe a lot of us would rather just see a damned virtual console show up and just say, hey, release these games that way so I can just buy them, maybe a Metroid collection makes more sense, And of course, I'm aware that the NES Online Games thing does have the original Metroid available there. So, like, you've got it through that avenue. But what about something that covers like Game Boy, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance games, stuff like that? I just think that there's maybe a reason to bring those games over. And if Nintendo's not going to do it digitally through individual like virtual consoles or the online service, stuff like that, why wouldn't they make like a retail collection package? I think that could be really cool. And of course, the last major idea I've discussed is just some random new game. Is it possible that Nintendo in this time period before Prime 4 comes out decides to release some weird brand new Metroid game that we have no idea to expect? Samus Returns caught everybody off guard. And again, although it was a remake, that game was also effectively brand new. So they really just basically made a brand new 2D Metroid game without anyone really knowing. There were some predictions out there. Super Metal Dave actually kind of knew that that was going to happen beforehand, but in general, that was a huge surprise. And I wouldn't put it past Nintendo to have started working on another 2D game for the Nintendo Switch around the time that Samus Returns was completing. And the benefit to that is that, you know, Samus Returns released in September 2017. You know, 4 or 5 months after the Switch had already released. So if Mercury Steam and that Nintendo team moved on to a new game after Samus Returns, it would have been for the Nintendo Switch. It wouldn't be something where they started it so long ago that it might have been like a Wii U game initially or another 3DS game. They would have probably started working on Switch hardware. And so the timing just makes sense, you know? Like, if Nintendo was willing to say, hey, we're making a Metroid Prime 4, here's a teaser, we'll tell you about it soon, and here's this surprise 3DS game we've been making that releases in just a couple of months. You know, if they were willing to make those two games at the same time, why wouldn't they be willing to move a team right on to another 2D Metroid game to release? You know, they probably would have expected that game to release right after Metroid Prime 4 released, something like that. And so, you know, Nintendo might have something like that planned. I think that the nature of this whole conversation, everything I'm talking about, all of these ideas coming off of E3, where we didn't see Metroid at all, is if Nintendo has bigger plans for the franchise beyond just making one console Metroid Prime 4 game. There is a reality, you guys, where that's the only thing Nintendo is worried about doing in the Metroid series right now. You know, they did the 2-game thing at E3 2 years ago and got Samus Returns out the door, and maybe now their only Metroid project just is Metroid Prime 4. No trilogy, no ports or remasters, no new games. Maybe that's all Nintendo's planning on doing, and they just need to get Metroid Prime 4 out first, see how everyone responds to that before they decide to continue to commit big time to Metroid. The same way Fire Emblem went through a huge lull for like a decade before it had this huge resurgence, and now we know that they've always got multiple Fire Emblem projects going at any one time. And so maybe Metroid needs that by getting through the release of Metroid Prime 4 and hopefully seeing it be a big success. It's tough to say, but I think that that's an idea that maybe we should all just keep in our heads so that we don't forget that and we don't get too carried away with our theories, you know? As much as I can talk to you about Metroid theories and lay out 5 different random dream Metroid projects that I would like to see and maybe Nintendo's working on, I don't want to also set your expectations so high that that's what you expect and it's the only thing you'll accept, and you'll be mad if Nintendo's kind of just taking their time and focusing on the one game. I think that at the end of the day, that would just be really unhealthy and not great or safe for most of us. So, you know, I would say temper your expectations. Let's all bring our Metroid hype down a little bit. You know, it's no fun to do that. We were all riding this Metroid hype over the course of this last year, and especially this last week or two going into E3, where many of us expected to see Metroid. I mean, I really expected to see Metroid Prime Trilogy, and it didn't happen. So I think it's a good lesson for us to learn, hey, let's just relax. We know at the very least, the worst case scenario is that Nintendo is making Metroid Prime 4, and it comes out in the future. That's not a bad worst case scenario. I am not unhappy with that. If that's the only thing we see in the next 3 years, I'm still going to be happy with it. Either way, it is interesting times for Metroid indeed. E3 2019 did not give us the big Metroid surprises and fulfill our wishes and hopes and dreams the way we really wanted and expected them to. And yeah, so things are a little bit weird right now, but we know we've got the one game coming. And I want to hear your guys' opinion on this whole thing. I mean, what you expect next from Metroid coming off of E3, where we didn't see anything. And what do you think is happening with the Prime Trilogy, if anything? What do you expect from Metroid Prime 4? Any other new games or surprises? Whatever you want to talk about when it comes to Metroid, please leave it below, because these are my favorite topics. And with that being said, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.